come up. Lena Bernard is a Radical Women member of the Continental Color Caucus of Radical Women, and our sister organization, the Freedom Socialist Party. She's been here in Seattle for a number of years and grew up in Malaysia. So she brings a very important perspective to Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, which is the month of April. So Lena's going to give a tribute to one of our earlier members, Merle Woo, who's living in San Francisco, who was an amazing groundbreaker and courageous fighter for Asian American feminism. She was a poet, an activist, and a writer, and some of her pamphlets for radical women are right behind Sarah there on the little round table. Yellow Woman Speaks, and 3 Asian American writers speak out on feminism. But Lena will tell you much more, and we are doing a live stream so that Emily Wu Yamasaki, Merle's adult child living in New York City, can watch and be part of this. And she will also share it with Merle in another time. Thank you, Lena.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry about this. I have to make sure this works. Okay, happy Asian and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, everyone. Today we're going to get to know Merle Woo, especially for those of us who are newer radical women, like myself. There are radical women and FSP members here who know her personally and have organized with her over the years, so please feel free to share some of your personal stories during discussion. Okay, before we get to Merle's story, I want to talk about why we should learn this history about a fellow radical women and FSP member, an Asian lesbian feminist who became nationally and even internationally known for her activism. Yoon Sung Kim, in an article titled "With Lunar Calendars on Pat Parker and Merle Woo," mentions students being expelled in the 1980s for engaging in anti-apartheid activism on college campuses, which is something Merle was very much a part of. The author connected that to what happened in 2024, right, when we had anti-genocide activism for Palestine on college campuses. She says, "This is not what is advertised in liberal narrations about history or the past. They emphasize linear progression and insist on positivistic development. Everything's a linear progression. You know, history is not a circular loop waiting to explode through connection." The author asks, what happens when we find each other? And to me, this is why we're talking about Merle today. This is why it's important to share that history with one another, because it helps us find each other. Okay, so my primary sources for this report are the numerous FS articles on and by Merle, a chapter on blasting the true story into breath, writing, work, and socialist feminism, in a book called Never by Itself Alone by David Grundy, an article titled Looking for Merle by Mitch Ling, and Yoon Sung Kim's article that I previously mentioned. So this is a brief overview of the things I've read. Please feel free to dig in. Okay, some background on Merle. She was born to a Korean mother and Chinese father. Grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown. This is the 1940s and 50s. This was a time when Asian Americans were hardly mentioned in American history. And to get an idea of the racism her family experienced, I'm going to use her own words. I'm going to quote her. Okay, the way I saw my father treated, he was an Asian grocery store clerk who didn't speak English well. Any work white men didn't want to do, low-paid labor such as laundry and cooking, Asian immigrants did. The men were consequently stereotyped as women, supposedly obsequious, passive, and obliging. They were victims of racism and sexism. I also felt the same powerful self-contempt that was drilled into my mother, who was raised in a missionary home for Korean orphans. Her religion taught her it was evil to be Korean, evil to be a woman. On top of all that, Merle also experienced racism in school. Nuns said to her, "Pray for Merle, her parents are pagans." And she would be asked, "Why don't you all go back to Chinatown?" Right? Despite all of this crazy shit, she became an acclaimed poet and writer, an activist, and an educator. She has had articles published in some very important anthologies, such as, Helen will show you, This Bridge Called My Back, writings by radical women of color and legacy to liberation, politics and culture of revolutionary Asian Pacific America. While married and with 2 children, including RW and FSP leader Emily Woo Yamasaki, Merle received her BA and MA at San Francisco State University, and in 1969, she was hired in the New Ethnic Studies program. And this was a result of the Third World Workers' Strike. Merle eventually moved to University of California, Berkeley in 1978. And for those of us who don't know, I didn't know this, the Third World Liberation Front is something that rose in 1968 as a coalition of ethnic groups on college campuses in California in response to Eurocentric education and lack of diversity at San Francisco State University and UC Berkeley. So Merle, she attributed her growing political awareness to teaching, number 1, and 2 is the Women's Writers Union. She observed how students were excluded because of class and race. The Educational Opportunity Program did not serve as many as it should have. She learned that education is mostly for the privileged few. She saw how students were put down and how propaganda molded some of our experiences, right? So at these Women's Writers Union, she saw that her personal experience was necessary to others, and that gave her self-affirmation. When asked about being made to feel insecure, with no identity as an Asian woman, she turned that self-contempt, she talked about self-contempt like her mother, that she had. She turned that into contempt for racism, sexism, and class oppression. All of those things that produce that self-contempt. So she recommends we move out of individualism and work with people and help make them into leaders, because we need everybody to win this fight. Okay, now I'm going to give you a sense of what kind of teacher she was. I'm going to quote her again, a couple paragraphs. Okay, Merle Woo said, "We ought to look at and learn from our most militant students, because they know they will be selling themselves in the marketplace. They will be looking at the world with a keen eye. They are change, a barometer of society. Many are rebellious, radical, idealistic. Since they have little to lose, they are the most apt to challenge authority." And what have they accomplished? In 1985, they helped bring apartheid to the attention of the world and expose the hell out of the university system. I've been involved in a 27-year struggle over students' minds, hearts, and bodies. Most students want a degree so they can get a decent paying job. At the same time, they want tools to survive as human beings, develop self-confidence and independence of thought. They wanted tools to change their communities. And these are the students I would fight for. People who have been denied the real history of their people. The resistance, rebellion, and heroism in the face of the strongest international ruling class in history. Okay, so what's Merle's connection to radical women? Let's bring it back. In the 70s, so we talked about the women's writers union. So in the 70s, a number of those union members joined Radical Women. Merle Woo, Suki Durham, Nellie Wong, and Karen Brodeen. They were drawn to socialist feminism, and they were writing as activists. There were others who viewed this as subordination, writing politics, and this created some divide. But RW and FSP aligned with Merle's values, offering an alternative to Stalinist, Maoist condemnations of feminism, debunked queer sexuality as some kind of bourgeois deviation, and addressed the perils of capitalism and class struggle. So Merle joined Radical Women in 1978. Okay, now I'm going to go into like the technical stuff. Merle Woo versus University of California, Berkeley. Stick with me, we got timeline. Okay, she was hired in 1978 as a lecturer in Asian American Studies at UC Berkeley. And by this time, she had proven herself. She has a 9-year excellent teaching record. She thought from a radical perspective. She had good knowledge in women's issues, and she supported the autonomous third world college at UC. Unfortunately, UC was shifting from 60s liberalism, and they had, this tenure track faculty that is becoming increasingly conservative, anti-radical, assimilationist. So she didn't just complain, she organized fiercely. And what happens in mid-1982, she gets fired from her job. Surprise. She charged UC with discrimination because of her politics, race, sex, sexuality, and criticism of this tenure track faculty. She packed up and left her office. On the blackboard, she wrote, "I shall return."
Yes.
Right? Sorry. No, don't be sorry. So UC claims, oh, this is just an administrative measure. Of course they do. Merle and her union, the American Federation of Teachers, with immense help from the Merle Woo Defense Committee, which was led by Radical Women and FSP members, they won a reversal of this rule before the California Public Employee Relations Board. But still, UC told Merle that she would not be hired back. She then goes on to file a lawsuit in federal court, charging that they interfered with her right to free speech and due process. And then additionally, she files an additional suit in Alameda Superior Court, charging the university with breach of contract and retaliatory discrimination. She won 2 years reinstatement, $48,548 settlement, and $25,000 in attorney fees. And in 1984, she returned to campus. This is win number 1.
Yay!
Okay, so she returns to campus, but she doesn't get her old position back in Asian American Studies. They give her a 2-year contract as a visiting lecturer in the Department of Education. She makes the best of it. In the new job, she trained tutors of English as a second language, and she sponsored student-organized classes like violence against women and multicultural lesbian and gay studies. She remained a revolutionary feminist, despite what happened to her. She spoke publicly about her socialist feminist values, about her membership at Radical Women and FSP, Freedom Socialist Party, and she continued to organize and criticize. She was, of course, involved in the anti-apartheid rallies, and she organized teachers' union lecturers. Okay, now we go to round 2, 1986. She gets fired again in violation of her settlement agreement. She doesn't give up. She and her union representative, they file a grievance protesting this discrimination and retaliation to her earlier victory. She obtained support again from the American Federation of Teachers, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Council 10. They represent about 25,000 UC employees, the National Women's Studies Association, and the Merle Woo Defense Committee. which reconvened after the latest attack. Okay, long story short, she ended up winning a 3-year-long grievance against UC.
Yay!
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 Yes. This was February 1989. The arbitrator directed the university to reinstate her in the fall of '89 with full back pay, benefits, and seniority. But what happens? Of course, they violated that, right? After winning so many fights, only to have agreements violated repeatedly. She was also struggling against breast cancer. Yeah. So she accepted a $75,000 settlement in lieu of reinstatement of her old job. But in the end, she won against those who tried to silence her. And that's important to know. Okay, many radical women and FSB members led the Merle Woo Defense Committee. They fought against UC Berkeley over the many years of harassment that she experienced. They ensured she kept a high public profile because they had to keep the pressure on UC Berkeley. Members across the US and Australia, they used every avenue possible to gather endorsements, raise money, and attract attention. And this became a proud history of radical women. After years of dealing with UC in 1990, she became the Freedom Socialist Party candidate for the government of California under the umbrella of the Peace and Freedom Party. She ran on some very important issues like unemployment, education, nationalized healthcare, reproductive rights, abortion on demand, forced sterilization, which, as we all know, mostly affected Native women and women of color. And she also had a focus on AIDS resources. Okay, now we know this woman has done so much. But she was also a cultural warrior, a performer, and a poet. She weaved together art and politics, and this was very important for the feminist movement at the time. The Asian American feminists and Outfront lesbians and the Unbound Feet performing group, which included Nellie Wong, were groundbreaking. Public poetry readings by feminists were big events. I'm going to read you a short snippet from a poem she wrote on the front line of freedom. And this was actually featured at the San Francisco Gay Freedom Day Parade. There were 250,000 people there, so it was a big deal. I march, stand, and fight with socialist feminists because, in its purest, most fulfilled definition, in theory and action, it is revolutionary feminism, which is a fight for everyone who is oppressed, in one way or another, and which has as its goal the certainty that those on the front line of freedom will inherit the earth. Okay, so I'm going to conclude by, let's just talk about what can we learn from Merle's victory and her fight, right? Why are we even talking about this? Because cases like Merle remind us that censorship is one of the most powerful forms of oppression. And her case exposed the oppressive nature of these, highly revered capitalist institutions. She said in 1983, "Kept in ignorance, not knowing our history, our roots, we have to start from the beginning." She did not just fight management, she was a unionist, a socialist, a feminist, an Asian lesbian, who just spoke out with dignity. She realized that there is an establishment sector of the Asian community that exercises its own form of censorship to keep women and queer folk invisible. And this is maintained through cultural nationalism, which focuses on race liberation as primary, women's liberation, and everyone else, they can come later, right? So today, as an Asian woman, myself, specifically a Malaysian Indian woman, I find her story, her personality, and her resilience to be extremely inspiring. People like Merle encourage me to dig deeper in search of my own people's history, to find the stories that got omitted, you know, the forgotten heroes of these collective struggles, because these are not easily accessible. For example, it wasn't too long ago that I learned about the first female infantry fighting unit in recent military history. They're called the Rani of Jhansi Regiment. They were formed in 1943. They were formed, it was an all-woman regiment. They were formed to overthrow the British Raj in India. And they recruited primarily from the Indian diaspora in Malaysia, Singapore, and Myanmar. I grew up there, and I had never heard of them until fairly recently. We all know here in the US, DEI programs are getting slashed, not getting slashed, are slashed. And, you know, there is this big push to erase women's history, Asian history, Black history, Native history, LGBTQ, immigrant history, and this is all happening at an accelerated pace. So let's dig these stories up, learn from them, so that we are equipped to wage our own battles collectively, like Merle Woo did.